He spent 40 years searching for God in the sand. 40 years, digging through the soil of Israel with a shovel in one hand and a Bible in the other. 40 years searching for proof that Moses had truly existed, that the Exodus had truly happened, that the walls of Jericho had truly crumbled. His name was William Dever, an evangelical pastor before becoming an archaeologist, a sincere believer, a man of faith. He wanted to prove the Bible, and he lost everything. Not his money, not his career. No, he lost his faith. Because with every strike of the pickaxe, with every layer of earth overturned, with every pottery shard dated by carbon-14, he found nothing, absolutely nothing. Not a trace of 2 million Hebrews wandering in the desert for 40 years. Not a single Egyptian inscription mentioning the plagues. Not a single bone, not a single encampment, not a single piece of refuse left by this immense crowd. Nothing. In 2001, after 4 decades of excavations, William Dever wrote a book. Its title, What Did the Biblical Writers Know, and When Did They Know It? His conclusion, in one sentence: Moses probably never existed. I know what you're thinking. An atheist archaeologist who was trying to destroy the Bible, right? No. A believer, a pastor, a man who wanted to prove his faith, and who had the courage to look the evidence in the face, even when it told him what he didn't want to hear. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what Dever found, or rather, what he did not find. In Egypt, in the Sinai, in Canaan. 3 places, 3 deafening silences, 3 absences that change everything. And by the end, you'll understand why this man of faith had to abandon the story of Moses. Not because he wanted to, but because stones don't lie. Before we continue, an important note. All the works I mention in this video are referenced in the description. You can consult them, purchase them, verify them for yourself. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm giving you the sources. And if this research brings you something of value, you can support the channel by joining the YouTube community via the link in the description, or by gifting me a book through the corresponding link. Now, let's begin. One thing before we continue. This video is not trying to destroy your faith. It's not telling you what to think. It's not asking you to renounce your beliefs. It shows you what archaeology has discovered, the facts, the dates, the material evidence. And then it's your choice. You can believe that Moses existed despite the absence of proof. That's your right. Faith doesn't need proof. That's even its definition. Or you can choose to see history as the stones tell it. Both paths are respectable. But you deserve to know the facts before you choose. That's the necessary perspective. Tucson, Arizona, summer of 1971. The heat is suffocating. 42 degrees Celsius in the shade. The air shimmers above the ochre ground. A man walks between the tents of an excavation site. He's 38 years old. Short beard, thick glasses, shirt soaked with sweat. His name is William Dever. Until the previous year, he was a pastor in an evangelical church in Kentucky. Then he had a revelation. Not divine, intellectual. He wanted to prove the Bible, not believe it, prove it with evidence. pottery shards, strata, carbon-14 dating. So he gave up everything: his congregation, his comfortable salary, his quiet certainty. He enrolled at university. He learned ancient Hebrew, field archaeology, stratigraphy. He became one of the most rigorous archaeologists of his generation. And now, he's directing excavations in Israel. That day, in Tucson, he's giving a lecture. Before him, 100 students. Behind him, a map of the Sinai Peninsula. He asks a simple question. Where's the evidence for the Exodus? Silence in the room. He points to the map, the Nile Delta, the Red Sea, the Sinai Desert, the land of Canaan. According to the Bible, 600,000 Hebrew men left Egypt, plus the women, plus the children, plus the livestock. Some calculations give 2 to 3 million people. He pauses. They wandered 40 years in this desert. 40 years, with tents, animals, dead to be buried, waste, encampments. He turns to the students. Where are the traces? A student raises his hand. Maybe they didn't survive? The desert, erosion? Dever shakes his head. No. The Sinai is one of the most excavated deserts in the world. Israeli archaeologists have spent decades combing through it. They've found nomadic encampments 10,000 years old, remains of Neolithic campfires, animal bones dating from the Bronze Age. He pauses. But not a single trace of the Hebrews. Not a pottery shard, not a bone, not a tool, not an inscription. Nothing. Another student speaks up. What about Egypt? The Egyptian archives? Dever sighs. It's the question he dreaded. The Egyptians documented everything. Absolutely everything. Victories and defeats, treaties and revolts, slaves and tributes. They had an obsessive bureaucracy. He projects an image, hieroglyphics covering an entire wall. These are the archives of Ramses II, the pharaoh many identify as the one from the Exodus. He reigned 66 years. We have thousands of documents from his reign, lists of workers, construction reports, grain inventories. Pause. Not a single mention of the Hebrews. Not a single mention of the plagues. Not a single mention of an army swallowed by the Red Sea. The silence in the room is heavy. Dever continues. Think about it. If the 10 plagues had truly struck Egypt, if the Nile had turned to blood, if all the firstborn had died in one night, if Pharaoh's army had been engulfed. He lets the sentence hang. It would be the greatest catastrophe in Egyptian history. How could they not have mentioned it? A student at the back of the room asks the question no one dares to ask. Professor, does this mean the Exodus never happened? Dever remains silent for a long moment. 30 years earlier, this question would have angered him. 20 years earlier, it would have troubled him. 10 years earlier, it would have saddened him. Now, it only provokes resigned acceptance. I came to Israel to prove the Bible, he finally says. I spent decades digging, searching, hoping. He looks at his hands, hands that have sifted through tons of earth, that have cleaned thousands of shards, that have searched, searched, searched. And I found nothing. That evening, alone in his office, William Dever writes in his journal. One sentence, just one. Stones don't lie, even when you wish they would. He sets down his pen. He looks out the window. The desert stretches infinitely under the moon. Somewhere out there, according to the Bible, 2 million people had wandered for 40 years. But the desert keeps its secrets. And sometimes, the greatest secret is that there's nothing to hide. But before we go further, you need to understand exactly what archaeology is questioning. We need to return to the story itself, the one you were told. You know it. You were told it in church, in Sunday school, in Cecil B. DeMille's films, in the cartoons of your childhood, in the paintings of Michelangelo, Poussin, Chagall. This story is everywhere, in our language, in our expressions, in our collective unconscious. Crossing the Red Sea, the 10 plagues, the golden calf, the promised land. You use these expressions without even thinking about them. They're part of our common cultural heritage. Let me summarize it in detail so we start from the same point, so you understand exactly what archaeology is questioning. It all begins 4 centuries before the Exodus. According to Genesis, Joseph, Jacob's son, is sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. He arrives in Egypt. Through a series of extraordinary reversals, he becomes vizier to Pharaoh, the second most powerful person in Egypt. A famine strikes Canaan. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt seeking grain. Reconciliation. Jacob and his entire family settle in Egypt. 70 people in total. Genesis chapter 46, verse 27. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. 400 years pass. These 70 people multiply. Exodus chapter 1, verse 7. The children of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So mighty, so numerous, that Pharaoh begins to fear. He says to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply." Pharaoh decides to enslave the Hebrews. He forces them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses, exhausting labor, under the whip of overseers. Exodus chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. So the Egyptians ruthlessly imposed labor on the children of Israel. They made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick. But even slavery is not enough to limit their growth. So Pharaoh orders something monstrous. Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every son that is born you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." A genocide of male newborns. It is in this context of terror that Moses is born. A woman of the tribe of Levi gives birth to a boy. She hides him for 3 months, but she can hide him no longer. So she takes a basket of bulrushes. She coats it with bitumen and pitch. She places the child inside. She sets it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river to bathe. She spots the basket. She opens it. She sees the child crying. Exodus chapter 2, verse 6. She opened it and saw the child. Behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." By a providential turn, Moses' sister, who was watching from afar, offers to fetch a Hebrew nurse. She brings back her own mother. Thus, Moses is raised by his biological mother at the expense of the Egyptian princess. When he is weaned, he is adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He becomes a prince of Egypt. Exodus chapter 2, verse 10. She named him Moses, for she said, I drew him out of the water. Moses grows up in the palace. He receives the education of an Egyptian prince. According to the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 7, verse 22, Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. But he does not forget his origins. One day, as an adult, he leaves the palace. He sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. His blood boils. Exodus chapter 2, verse 12. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day, he intervenes in a dispute between two Hebrews. One of them says, Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Moses realizes his crime is known. Pharaoh learns of the matter. He seeks to kill Moses. Moses flees. He crosses the desert. He arrives in the land of Midian. 40 years pass. Moses marries Zipporah, the daughter of a Midianite priest. He becomes a shepherd. He tends the flocks of his father-in-law in the desert. One day, he leads the flock beyond the desert to the mountain of God, Horeb. And there, something extraordinary happens. Exodus chapter 3, verses 2 through 4. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. Moses looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. God reveals himself to Moses. He gives him his mission. Return to Egypt, confront Pharaoh, liberate the Hebrew people. Exodus chapter 3, verse 10. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Moses hesitates. He objects. He says he is not eloquent, that no one will believe him. God gives him signs: the staff that turns into a serpent, the hand that becomes leprous, then heals, the water of the Nile that turns to blood. And God reveals his name. Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. God said to Moses, I am who I am. In Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. The Tetragrammaton, YHWH. The sacred name. Unpronounceable. Moses returns to Egypt. With his brother Aaron as spokesman, he presents himself before Pharaoh. Exodus chapter 5, verse 1. Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh refuses. Exodus chapter 5, verse 2. Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. Worse, he increases the burden on the slaves. From now on, they must make bricks without being given straw. They must gather straw themselves while maintaining the same production. The Hebrew foremen are beaten.
the people suffer even more than before. Then God sends the 10 plagues. First, the waters turned to blood. The Nile, source of Egypt's life, turns red. The fish die. The water becomes undrinkable. Exodus chapter 7, verses 20 and 21.
Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded. Aaron lifted up the staff and struck the water in the Nile, in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. And all the water in the Nile turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank. Pharaoh refuses to yield. Then come the frogs. They invade everything: houses, bedrooms, beds, ovens, kneading bowls. Exodus chapter 8, verse 3. The Nile shall swarm with frogs. They shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed, into the houses of your servants and your people, into your ovens and your kneading bowls. Pharaoh promises to let the Hebrews go. Moses prays. The frogs die. Pharaoh goes back on his word. Then the gnats, or mosquitoes, depending on the translation. The dust of the ground turns into insects that bite man and beast. Then the flies. Swarms of venomous flies invade Egypt, but not the land of Goshen, where the Hebrews live. Then the plague on livestock. All the Egyptians' animals die: horses, donkeys, camels, oxen, sheep, but not a single animal of the Hebrews. Then the boils. Festering sores breaking out on the skin of the Egyptians and their animals. Then the hail. Hail of unprecedented violence, mixed with fire, destroying crops, killing livestock left outside, shattering trees. Exodus chapter 9, verse 24. There was hail and fire flashing continually in the midst of the hail, very heavy hail, such as had never been in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. Then the locusts. They devour everything the hail had spared, not a green leaf left in the entire land. Then the darkness. For 3 days, total darkness covers Egypt, so thick it can be felt. The Egyptians cannot see one another, but the Hebrews have light. With each plague, Pharaoh promises to yield. Each time, he goes back on his word. Why? Because God hardens his heart. Exodus chapter 10, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them." God wants to display his power. He prolongs the confrontation to multiply the miracles. And then comes the 10th plague, the most terrible. Exodus chapter 11, verses 4 and 5. Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle." To protect the Hebrews, God commands them to perform a ritual. Each family must sacrifice a lamb, take its blood, put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the house. Exodus chapter 12, verse 13. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This is the origin of Passover, Pesach in Hebrew, which means to pass over. At midnight, the Lord strikes. Exodus chapter 12, verses 29 and 30. At midnight, The Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. This time, Pharaoh yields. Exodus chapter 12, verses 31 and 32. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel. Go, serve the Lord as you have said." The Hebrews leave in haste, without even time to let their dough rise. This is why unleavened bread is eaten during Passover. How many were there? Exodus chapter 12, verse 37. The people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. 600,000 adult men, not counting women, children, the elderly. Traditional estimates give 2 to 3 million people, plus livestock. A great many flocks and herds. But Pharaoh changes his mind. Exodus chapter 14, verse 5. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people. They said, "What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us?" Pharaoh gathers his army, 600 elite chariots, all the cavalry of Egypt. He sets off in pursuit of the Hebrews. The Hebrews arrive at the edge of the Sea of Reeds, traditionally identified as the Red Sea. Before them, the water. Behind them, Pharaoh's army. They are trapped. The people panic. They accuse Moses. Exodus chapter 14, verses 11 and 12. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." Moses answers. Exodus chapter 14, verses 13 and 14. Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." Then he raises his staff. Exodus chapter 14, verses 21 and 22. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Hebrews cross on dry ground. The Egyptian army follows after them. But God looks upon the Egyptian army. He throws them into confusion. The chariot wheels clog. The horses panic. The Egyptians understand. Exodus chapter 14, verse 25. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Too late. Exodus chapter 14, verses 27 and 28. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. Pharaoh's army is annihilated. After crossing the sea, the wandering begins. 40 years in the Sinai desert. Why 40 years? Because the people lacked faith. They doubted God. They grumbled against Moses. God decides that the generation that left Egypt will not see the promised land. They will die in the desert. Only their children will enter Canaan. Numbers chapter 14, verses 29 and 30. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness. Of all your number, numbered from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell. During these 40 years, God takes care of his people. He gives them manna, a mysterious substance that appears each morning on the ground like dew, that tastes like honey cakes, and that feeds the people for 40 years. Exodus chapter 16, verse 31. The house of evil, Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. He gives them water. When they are thirsty, Moses strikes the rock with his staff, and water gushes forth. Exodus chapter 17, verse 6. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink. He sends them quail when they demand meat. Numbers chapter 11, verse 31. Then a wind from the Lord sprang up, and it brought quail from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp. And at Mount Sinai, 3 months after leaving Egypt, God gives Moses the law, the 10 Commandments, engraved by his own finger on tablets of stone. Exodus chapter 20. You know them by heart. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet. Plus the 613 commandments of the rest of the Torah. Laws on sacrifices, on purity, on diet, on festivals, on social relations, on justice. The entire legal and religious framework of the people of Israel, given by God himself to Moses on the sacred mountain. Finally, after 40 years, the Hebrews arrive at the gates of Canaan. Moses dies on Mount Nebo after gazing upon the promised land from afar. He cannot enter. He too has sinned against God. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 4 and 5. The Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab. Joshua takes over. He leads the people across the Jordan. The river stops flowing to let them pass. A new miracle like the Red Sea. Then the conquest begins. Jericho, the first city. The Hebrews march around it for 7 days. On the 7th day they blow trumpets. The walls collapse. Joshua chapter 6, verse 20. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. The city is destroyed, its inhabitants slaughtered. They devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, with the edge of the sword. then Ai, then Hazor, then Lachish, then Hebron, then Debir. City after city, the Hebrews conquer Canaan. Joshua, chapter 11, verse 23. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses. And Joshua gave it for an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. The land is divided among the 12 tribes. Each receives its territory. The promise made to Abraham is fulfilled. That's the story, the founding narrative of the Jewish people, the foundation of Christianity, a reference in Islam. 3 billion people on this planet consider this story true, historically true, literally true. And I understand why. It's a magnificent story, an epic, a grand spectacle, an oppressed people who liberate themselves, a charismatic leader who confronts the tyrant, miracles that defy the laws of nature, a covenant with the creator of the universe, a promised land flowing with milk and honey. This story has power, immense power. It has given hope to millions of slaves, prisoners, and oppressed people throughout the centuries. American slaves sang spirituals about Moses and the Promised Land. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Black South Africans under apartheid identified with the Hebrews under the Egyptian yoke. Martin Luther King, the night before his assassination, invoked Moses in his final speech. I've been to the mountaintop, and I've seen the promised land. This story says something profound about the human condition, that oppression is not eternal, that tyrants fall, that freedom is possible, that God, or history, or justice, is on the side of the oppressed. But here is the question William Dever dared to ask. The question very few people dare to ask. Is this story true? Not symbolically true, not spiritually true, not true in a metaphorical sense. Historically true. Factually true. Did these events actually happen? Did Moses actually exist? Did 2 million people actually cross the Red Sea? Did the walls of Jericho actually fall at the sound of trumpets? This is where the problems begin. Israel Finkelstein is perhaps the most respected archaeologist in Israel, director of the Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University for more than 20 years, member of the Israel Academy of Sciences, author of hundreds of scientific articles published in the most prestigious journals, recipient of the Dan David Prize in 2005 for his exceptional contributions to archaeology. He is not an amateur. He is not an anti-religious ideologue from outside. He is an Israeli scientist, born in Israel, who has devoted his entire life to studying his own heritage. He has excavated dozens of sites in Israel: Megiddo, Shiloh, Hatzor, the Central Highlands, the Negev. He knows every shard, every wall, every stratum. In 2001, he published a book with Neil Asher Silberman, an American historian specializing in the ancient Near East. A book that sent shockwaves through the academic world. Its title, The Bible Unearthed. Its subtitle, Archaeology's New Vision of Ancient Israel and the Origin of its Sacred Texts. Its central question, posed with implacable scientific rigor: do the biblical narratives correspond to the archaeological evidence? The answer, after decades of systematic excavations, is devastating. No, they do not correspond. Not at all. Finkelstein asks a simple question, a question a 10-year-old could ask, a question so obvious you wonder why no one asked it sooner. If 2 to 3 million people wandered in the Sinai desert for 40 years, where are the traces? Think about it for a moment. Really. Stop. Do the math. 2 to 3 million people. The number comes from the Bible itself. Exodus chapter 12, verse 37 speaks of 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Add the women, at least 600,000. The children, probably more than 1 million. The elderly, the mixed multitude that followed them. The livestock. The most conservative estimates give 2 million people. To give you an idea of what that represents, it's the equivalent of the current population of Inner Paris. Imagine the entire population of Paris moving through a desert for 40 years. These people had to eat 3 times a day for 40 years. That's 43,800 meals per person, multiplied by 2 million. 87,600,000,000 meals. They had to drink, in a desert, at least 3 liters of water per person per day in that climate. 6 million liters of water per day. 2 billion liters per year. 80 billion liters over 40 years. They had to sleep, clothe themselves, wear shoes, bury their dead, tend to their sick, make tools, cook their food. Where are the traces? Where are the encampments? Where are the graves? Where's the refuse? Let's start with Egypt. According to the Bible, the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt for 430 years. They were so numerous, they frightened the Egyptians. They built the cities of Pithom and Ramesses. They suffered a genocide of male newborns. They were freed by spectacular miracles. Pharaoh's army was swallowed by the sea. Ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with writing and documentation. The Egyptians had a monumental bureaucracy, armies of scribes who recorded everything, absolutely everything. Battles won and battles lost, peace treaties and vassal treaties, tributes received and tributes paid, lists of workers, rations distributed, materials used, bricks produced, revolts, epidemics, famines, Nile floods, eclipses, earthquakes. We have tens of thousands of Egyptian documents from this period. Administrative papyri, commemorative stelae, inscriptions on temple walls, texts in tombs, diplomatic letters, commercial contracts. We know what Ramses II did during his 66 years of reign, year by year, military campaign by military campaign. We know the names of his wives, his children, his favorite horses. We know how many bricks his workers produced per day at Pi-Ramesses. We have reports from overseers complaining about absent workers. And the Hebrews? Silence. Not a mention. Not a single Egyptian document mentions a population of Hebrew slaves. Not a single document mentions a man named Moses or Moshe or any similar name. Not a single document mentions the 10 plagues. Not a single document mentions the Nile turning to blood. Not a single document mentions 3 days of darkness. Not a single document mentions the death of the firstborn. Not a single document mentions the mass departure of a slave population. Not a single document mentions an army swallowed by the sea. Nothing. The silence is total. William Dever said it clearly during that lecture in Tucson in 1971. If the 10 plagues had struck Egypt, if the Nile had turned to blood, if darkness had covered the land for 3 days, if all the firstborn had died in one night, if Pharaoh's army had been destroyed, it would be the greatest catastrophe in Egyptian history. How could they not have mentioned it? One could argue that the Egyptians would have wanted to hide this humiliation, erase the traces of their defeat. But this argument doesn't hold. The Egyptians didn't hide their defeats, not systematically anyway. We have documents about revolts in the Delta, about incursions by foreign peoples, about battles lost to the Hittites, about the humiliating peace treaty Ramses II had to sign after the Battle of Kadesh. The Egyptians documented everything, including their failures, but not the Exodus. There is one single mention of Israel in Egyptian archives from this period. Just one. The Merneptah stele, dated to 1207 BCE, erected by Pharaoh Merneptah, son and successor of Ramses II. This stele commemorates a military campaign in Canaan. It lists the peoples conquered, and among them, one line: Israel is laid waste, his seed is no more. That's it. One mention, in passing, among a list of conquered peoples. And note well, not in Egypt, in Canaan. The Egyptians knew of a group called Israel living in Canaan around 1207 BCE, but they never mention Hebrew slaves in Egypt. Never a mass exodus, never miraculous plagues, never an engulfed army. The silence is deafening. Let's move now to the Sinai Desert. 40 years, 2 to 3 million people, plus livestock. The Sinai Desert is one of the most excavated archaeological terrains in the world. Why? Because Israeli archaeologists, after the Six-Day War in 1967, had access to the peninsula, and they wanted to find evidence of the Exodus. They wanted to confirm their founding narrative. They had the means, the expertise, the motivation. They searched for decades. Here's what they found. Neolithic nomadic encampments, dated to 8,000 to 10,000 years before our era. Traces of small groups of hunter-gatherers. Remains of Bronze Age campfires, dated to 3,000 to 2,000 BCE. Stone circles, animal bones. Nabatean inscriptions from the first millennium BCE. Graffiti left by caravan traders. Pottery, tools, jewelry from various periods. The desert preserves human traces remarkably well. The air is dry, practically no humidity, no rapid decomposition. Vegetation is sparse, no roots to disturb archaeological layers. Water erosion is minimal, no torrential rains to wash everything away. Archaeologists have found traces of encampments 10,000 years old. Bones, ashes, flint tools. And the Hebrews of the Exodus? Nothing. Not an encampment, not a grave, not a pottery shard, not a bone, not a tool, not an inscription. Nothing. Zero. Absolute void. Finkelstein writes in The Bible Unearthed, "The archaeology of the Sinai has revealed no trace of a massive presence in the late Bronze Age, the supposed time of the Exodus, around 1250 BCE. Not even traces of a small group of nomads. The archaeological silence is total and unequivocal." Some will say, but they were nomads. Nomads don't leave traces. False. Archaeologists have found traces of small nomadic groups in the Sinai, groups of a few dozen people, temporary encampments, fires, bones of eaten animals, abandoned tools. The Sinai has been traversed by nomads for millennia, and they all left traces. But 2 to 3 million people? Impossible for them not to leave any trace. It's statistically, physically, archaeologically impossible. Let's do a simple calculation.
If 2 million people wandered in the desert for 40 years, how many died? The generation that left Egypt was supposed to die before entering Canaan. That's what the Bible itself says. All adults over 20 years old. That's at minimum 600,000 adult men, plus women of the same generation, plus children who died in infancy, infant.
Mortality was enormous in antiquity. Plus the elderly. Let's say conservatively 1 million deaths over 40 years. Probably more. Where are the graves? 1 million bodies buried in the Sinai desert. The Hebrews of the Bible buried their dead. It was a religious obligation. Jacob was embalmed and buried. Joseph was embalmed and his bones were carried out of Egypt. 1 million graves in the desert. Not a single one has been found. Where is the refuse? 2 million people for 40 years. Broken pottery. And in antiquity, people broke a lot of pottery. Worn tools, torn sandals, tattered clothing, animal bones after meals, and they had livestock, great herds, mountains of refuse, not a single shard. Where are the traces of encampments? 2 million people stopping somewhere, even for one night, leaves traces. Stone circles to mark tents, hearths for cooking, latrines, enclosures for livestock. Nothing. Eliezer Oren, archaeologist at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, directed intensive excavations in northern Sinai for more than 10 years. He excavated systematically, gridded the region, used the most modern techniques. His conclusion, published in the 1990s, we systematically excavated the region the Israelites would have crossed according to the biblical itinerary. We found no trace of massive human activity corresponding to the period of the Exodus. None. The desert keeps its secrets, but sometimes the greatest secret is that there's nothing to find. Let's move now to Canaan, the Promised Land. According to the book of Joshua, the Hebrews conquered Canaan by force, a brutal and systematic war of conquest, city after city. Jericho, Ai, Hatzor, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, Debir, dozens of cities. The walls collapse. The inhabitants are slaughtered with the edge of the sword. Men, women, children, livestock. Everything is destroyed. Everything is burned. This is what the Bible calls herem, the ban, total destruction consecrated to God. Here's what archaeology reveals. Jericho. Excavations began in the 19th century. They were resumed and refined in the 20th century, notably by British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon in the 1950s. Kenyon was meticulous. She used the most rigorous stratigraphic methods of her time. She dated each layer with precision. Her conclusion? Jericho had no walls in the 13th century BCE. The city had experienced a period of prosperity in the early Bronze Age, around 2300 BCE. It had had impressive walls, but these walls had been destroyed around 2000 BCE, probably by an earthquake. The city had been rebuilt, then abandoned around 1550 BCE. At the supposed time of Joshua's conquest, around 1250 BCE, Jericho was a small, unfortified village. A few houses, perhaps a few dozen inhabitants. No walls to bring down. Ai, the name, itself is revealing. Ai in Hebrew means ruin, heap of rubble. Excavations showed that the city had been destroyed and abandoned around 2400 BCE, 1,000 years before Joshua. At the supposed time of the conquest, I was what its name indicates, a ruin, a pile of stones, uninhabited for centuries. Joshua conquered a ruin? This is where the story becomes fascinating. Archaeologists believe the account of Ai's conquest is an etiology, a story invented to explain something observed. The Israelites of the royal period saw these impressive ruins. They wondered, who destroyed this city? Answer, our ancestors, of course, under Joshua's leadership. The narrative was created to explain the ruins, not the other way around. Hazor. Here there is indeed evidence of destruction. Around 1230 BCE, a thick layer of ash, collapsed walls, signs of violent fire. Someone destroyed Hazor around that time. But who? The candidates are numerous. The Egyptians conducted regular military campaigns in the region. Merneptah led a campaign in Canaan around 1207 BCE. His father, Ramses II, had led several. The Sea Peoples, mysterious groups from the Mediterranean, were devastating the coasts of the Levant at this time. They destroyed the Hittite Empire. They attacked Egypt. They settled on the Canaanite coast. They are probably the ancestors of the Philistines. Internal conflicts between Canaanite city-states were frequent. The Amarna letters, dated to the 14th century BCE, show Canaanite kings complaining of being attacked by their neighbors. Nothing allows us to attribute Hazor's destruction to the Hebrews rather than to others. The layer of ash bears no label. And here's the most troubling thing of all: the material culture. When one people conquers another, we see a change in material culture. It's an almost universal law in archaeology. Invaders bring their pottery, their architectural styles, their burial practices, their weapons, their tools, their jewelry. Archaeologists can identify an invasion by these abrupt changes in the archaeological record. The Romans conquer Gaul. We see Roman amphorae appear, Roman tiles, Roman coins. The Mongols conquer China. We see changes in ceramic styles, in architecture, in burial practices. In Canaan, in the 13th and 12th centuries BCE, no cultural break. The pottery remains the same forms, the same manufacturing techniques, the same decorative motifs. The architecture remains the same types of houses, the same construction techniques. Burial practices remain the same types of tombs, the same offerings. What we see is continuity, progressive evolution, not brutal conquest. If 2 million people from Egypt had invaded Canaan, we would see massive changes in material culture. We would see Egyptian pottery, Egyptian architectural styles, Egyptian burial practices. We see nothing of the sort. Finkelstein proposes another explanation, an explanation that has revolutionized biblical archaeology. The Israelites were not invaders from Egypt. They were Canaanites, semi-nomadic pastoralists who had lived on the margins of Canaanite city-states for centuries, who, in the 12th century BCE, for complex reasons, collapse of city-states, climate change, economic pressures, settled in the Central Highlands, who progressively developed a distinct identity over generations, who became Israel. The evidence? The primitive Israelite villages of the Central Highlands, dated to the 12th and 11th centuries BCE, have pottery identical to Canaanite pottery. Their houses follow the same architectural patterns as Canaanite houses. Their tools are the same as Canaanite tools. Their dietary practices are similar, with one notable exception: the absence of pig bones. Primitive Israelite sites contain virtually no pig bones. Canaanite sites in the plains contain many. This dietary difference, which will later become a major identity marker of Judaism, is one of the few things distinguishing the early Israelites from their Canaanite neighbors. But it's a cultural difference, not an ethnic difference. The Israelites did not come from elsewhere. They were born here, in Canaan, from Canaanites who progressively developed a distinct identity. And the story of the Exodus, a founding myth, created centuries later, to give this people a glorious origin, a story of liberation, a covenant with God, to explain why they were different from their neighbors, to justify their claim to this land. This is not an insult, it's history. And understanding this history does not diminish the power of the narrative. On the contrary. Let's recap what we've discovered. 3 silences, 3 absences, 3 archaeological voids. Egypt never mentions the Hebrew slaves, nor the plagues, nor the Exodus. The Sinai contains no trace of 2 million people wandering for 40 years. Canaan shows no brutal conquest, but cultural continuity with local populations. Faced with these absences, 2 possibilities. Either God miraculously erased all traces, every bone, every shard, every inscription, to test our faith, or the Exodus as described in the Bible never happened. William Dever, after 40 years of excavations, chose the second option. Not out of atheism, not out of hostility toward religion, out of intellectual honesty, because stones don't lie. But then a question arises. If the Exodus didn't happen, if Moses didn't exist as described, who invented this story, and why? To answer this question, we must travel through time, not to the Egypt of Ramses II, to another place, another time. Jerusalem. 7th century BCE. 622 BCE. Reign of King Josiah. Josiah is 8 years old when he ascends the throne of Judah. His father Ammon was assassinated by his own servants. His grandfather Manasseh had reigned 55 years worshiping foreign gods. The kingdom is in crisis, spiritually, politically, economically. The Assyrian Empire, which had dominated the region for centuries, is collapsing. Nineveh will fall in 612 BCE. A power vacuum opens. Josiah sees an opportunity. And then, something extraordinary happens. Second Book of Kings, chapter 22, verse 8. Then Hilkiah, the high priest, said to Shaphan the secretary, "I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord." A book found in the temple. A book no one had ever seen before. The book of the law. When Josiah hears the words of this book, he tears his clothes, he weeps, he laments, because this book contains laws the people of Judah have never followed. Commandments they have ignored for generations, terrifying curses for those who disobey. Josiah immediately launches a massive religious reform. He destroys all the altars to foreign gods. He burns the cult objects of Baal and Asherah. He defiles the high places where other divinities were worshipped. He centralizes all worship in Jerusalem, at the temple. One God, one temple, one king. What was this book of the law? Scholars today agree it was a primitive version of Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Torah, the book containing Moses' speeches before his death, the book that repeats and develops the Ten Commandments. But here's the question modern scholars dared to ask. Was this book truly found, or was it written? Richard Elliott Friedman, professor at the University of Georgia and one of the greatest specialists in biblical composition, has studied this question for decades. His conclusion, shared by many biblical scholars, the Book of the Law was not discovered. It was composed, probably by the priests of the Jerusalem temple themselves, perhaps by Hilkiah, the high priest who found it. Why would they have done this? To understand, you have to grasp the political context. Josiah wanted to unify his kingdom, centralize power, eliminate rival cults, establish Jerusalem as the only legitimate religious center. For this, he needed a higher authority, something indisputable, something divine, an ancient book written by Moses himself, containing God's commandments. Deuteronomy insists on a central point. Worship must be centralized in the place the Lord will choose. That place is Jerusalem. No more local sanctuaries, no more village priests, no more regional cults. Everything must go through the temple, through the priests of Jerusalem, through the king. Do you see the mechanism? Josiah needed to legitimize his political reform. The priests needed to centralize their power. Together, they discovered a book that justified exactly what they wanted to do. This was not necessarily a cynical lie. They probably believed they were serving God, purifying worship, saving their people from idolatry. But the result is the same. Deuteronomy was not written by Moses in the 13th century BCE. It was composed in the 7th century BCE in Jerusalem to serve the interests of a politico-religious reform. But the story doesn't end there. Josiah dies in 609 BCE, killed at the Battle of Megiddo against Pharaoh Necho II. His reform collapses, and in 586 BCE, the worst happens. Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, besieges Jerusalem. The city falls. The temple is destroyed. The elites are deported to Babylon. The Babylonian exile, 50 years of captivity. For the Jews of the time, it's the end of the world. Their city lies in ruins. Their temple no longer exists. Their king is a prisoner. Their God seems to have abandoned them. Around them, other deported peoples assimilate within a generation. The Moabites disappear. The Edomites merge into the empire. The Ammonites cease to exist as a distinct people. The Jewish scribes understand they face the greatest danger in their history. Not physical death, cultural death, assimilation, oblivion. They must create something powerful, something that will hold their people together, something that will give them a unique, irreducible, eternal identity. It is during the exile that the scribes compile and edit the texts that will become the Torah. They take the ancient traditions, the stories of the patriarchs, the tribal legends, Josiah's Book of the Law, and they weave them together into a coherent narrative. A narrative that begins with the creation of the world, that passes through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that culminates in the Exodus, the liberation from Egypt, the covenant at Sinai, that ends at the gates of the Promised Land. Moses becomes the central character of this narrative, the liberator, the lawgiver, the supreme prophet, the man who spoke to God face to face. Did a man named Moses exist historically? Perhaps. Probably even. There was likely a leader, a chief, a founding figure around whom traditions crystallized. But the Moses of the Bible, the one who confronts Pharaoh, who parts the Red Sea, who receives the Ten Commandments, is a literary construction, a character created to embody the identity of a people. This is not an insult, it's history. And understanding this history does not diminish the power of the narrative. On the contrary. Let's return to William Dever, this evangelical pastor turned archaeologist, this man who wanted to prove the Bible. What did 40 years of excavations teach him? In his book, Who Were the Early Israelites and Where Did They Come From?, published in 2003, Dever writes something remarkable. I began my career as a conservative believer. I wanted archaeology to confirm the Bible. I spent decades searching for those confirmations, and I didn't find them. The Exodus, as described in the Bible, has no archaeological support. The conquest of Canaan, as described in Joshua, did not happen. The patriarchal narratives cannot be confirmed. This is not what I wanted to find, but it's what I found. Dever describes the painful process of losing his faith. Not a sudden loss, a slow erosion, stone by stone, excavation by excavation, absence by absence. Each site that revealed nothing, each stratum that remained silent, each hope that crumbled. There were nights I couldn't sleep, he writes. I wondered if I had wasted my life, if everything I had believed was a lie. But I realized something important. Truth has value in itself, even when it hurts. Even when it destroys what we love, truth remains truth. Dever did not become an atheist. He describes himself as a respectful agnostic. He doesn't despise believers. He understands the need for faith. He recognizes the value of founding narratives, but he refuses to lie. He refuses to say archaeology confirms the Exodus when it doesn't. He refuses to pretend evidence exists when it doesn't. My job is not to defend the Bible, he writes. My job is to discover what actually happened. And what I discovered is that biblical narratives are literary, theological, identity constructions. They are myths in the noble sense of the term, stories that carry a profound truth about a people's identity, but not historical accounts in the modern sense. This distinction is crucial. A myth is not a lie. A myth is a story that carries meaning, that transmits values, that creates identity. The Greeks knew the Iliad was a poem, not journalistic reporting. That didn't diminish its value. The Romans knew Romulus and Remus weren't really suckled by a she-wolf. That didn't stop them from cherishing this story. Perhaps we can do the same with the Exodus. Recognize that it's a founding myth, a literary construction, a human creation, and love it anyway. For what it says about freedom, about resistance to oppression, about hope for a promised land. Now, let's address the question you've been asking since the beginning. If Moses didn't exist as described, if the Exodus didn't happen as told, what does this mean for the three great monotheistic religions? Let's start with Judaism. Judaism rests on the Torah, the 5 books attributed to Moses. If Moses didn't write these books, If the covenant at Sinai is a literary construction, what becomes of Judaism? The answer depends on what we mean by Judaism. If Judaism is a religion that demands literal faith in every word of the Torah, then yes, the archaeological discoveries pose a serious problem. But Judaism has never been only that. Rabbinic Judaism, for 2,000 years, has always interpreted texts, searched for hidden meanings, accepted multiple readings. The Talmud is filled with debates between rabbis about the meaning of texts. Contradictory interpretations coexist. Oral tradition is as important as written tradition. Many modern Jews, including rabbis, accept the conclusions of biblical archaeology. They recognize that the Torah is a human work, composed over several centuries, edited during the Exile. And they continue to cherish it, to study it, to practice it. Because for them, the Torah's value doesn't depend on its literal historicity. It lies in its wisdom, in its ethical teachings, in its capacity to create community. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of the 20th century, wrote, "The Bible is not a book about God. It's a book about humanity seeking God." This perspective allows us to honor the text without requiring it to be historically accurate. And Christianity? Christianity inherits the Torah and adds the New Testament. Jesus himself refers to Moses. The Gospels quote Exodus. Paul speaks of the spiritual rock that followed the Hebrews in the wilderness. If the Exodus is a myth, do these references become void? Not necessarily. The New Testament authors weren't doing archaeology. They were using the narratives of their tradition. They found spiritual meanings in them. When Paul speaks of the spiritual rock, he's not giving a history lesson. He's doing theological meditation. The rock represents Christ. It's allegory, not journalism. Many modern Christian theologians accept the conclusions of biblical criticism. They recognize that Old Testament narratives are literary constructions, and they continue to find spiritual truth in these narratives. The Exodus becomes a metaphor for liberation from sin. The crossing of the Red Sea becomes a symbol of baptism. The Promised Land becomes the kingdom of God. Theologian Paul Tillich wrote, "A myth that is recognized as myth does not lose its truth. It reveals it more clearly." For Tillich, biblical narratives are not true because they're historical. They're true because they say something profound about the human condition. And Islam? Islam venerates Moses, Musa, as one of the greatest prophets. The Quran tells the story of the Exodus, the plagues, the crossing of the sea, the 10 Commandments. If these events didn't happen, is Islam affected? This is a delicate question. Traditional Islam affirms that the Quran is the direct word of God, transmitted to Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. It is considered infallible, unaltered, perfect. If the Quran tells a story that didn't happen, this poses a serious theological problem for Orthodox Islam. However, some modern Muslim thinkers propose more nuanced readings. They suggest that Quranic narratives are not necessarily historical reports, that they are spiritual teachings, that their truth is moral, not factual. These interpretations remain minority views and often controversial, but they exist. The question is not settled. It probably never will be. What is certain is that archaeological discoveries force believers of all three religions to reflect, to ask themselves, what do I truly believe, and why? Let's step back. What we've discovered about the Exodus is not unique. All peoples create founding myths, stories that explain their origins, that justify their existence, that give them a place in the universe. The Romans had Romulus and Remus, two abandoned twins suckled by a she-wolf, who founded the greatest city of the ancient world. Is it historically true? Obviously not. Did the Romans believe it? Probably not literally, but they cherished this story. It told them who they were. Americans have their founding fathers, Washington, who cannot tell a lie, Jefferson, who writes the Declaration of Independence in a flash of genius, Franklin, who captures lightning. Are these stories true? Partly, but they've been embellished, mythologized, sacralized. Washington owned slaves. Jefferson did too. The Declaration of Independence was written and rewritten by committee. But Americans prefer the heroic version. It tells them who they want to be. The French have their myths. Our ancestors, the Gauls. Vercingetorix resisting Caesar. Joan of Arc saving France. The Revolution bringing freedom to the world. Are these accounts accurate? Partially. But they've been shaped, reshaped, idealized. Vercingetorix lost. Joan of Arc was burned by French as much as English. The Revolution guillotined thousands of innocents. But the French prefer the glorious version. Do you see the pattern? Every people does the same thing. Create a narrative of origins, embellish it, sacralize it, transmit it. This isn't dishonesty, it's identity construction. Humans need stories to know who they are. The Exodus is the founding myth of the Jewish people. It says, "We were slaves, and we were freed. We have a covenant with God. We have a promised land." This story has held the Jewish people together for 2,500 years, through dispersions, persecutions, attempts at extermination. Rome fell. Babylon fell. The Ottoman Empire fell. But the Jews are still here, thanks to this story. So yes, the Exodus is probably a myth, but it's a myth that worked, a myth that saved a people, a myth that changed the world. We're reaching the end of this investigation. What have you learned? That archaeology does not confirm the Exodus as described in the Bible. That Moses, if he existed, was not the character described in the texts. That the Exodus narrative is probably a literary construction from the 6th century BCE. That this construction served political, religious, and identity objectives. What will you do with this knowledge? You can choose to ignore it. Close this page. Return to your certainties. Act as if you'd heard nothing. That's a respectable choice. I won't judge you. Comfort has value. So does faith. So does tradition. Or you can choose to integrate this knowledge, to recognize that founding narratives are human constructions, to understand that historical truth and spiritual truth are not the same thing, to see that myths have value precisely because they are human creations. Because here's what I've understood. If Moses had been a real person who had actually parted the Red Sea by miracle, that would be impressive. But if scribes in exile, facing their people's annihilation, created a story so powerful that it held that people together for 2,500 years, that's even more impressive. It shows that humanity, without divine intervention, is capable of extraordinary things. That we can create meaning in the face of absurdity. That we can build identity in the face of dissolution. That we can survive in the face of the impossible. Your children, your grandchildren. They're going to grow up in a world where myths are created in real time, where narratives spread instantly on social media, where alternative truths become certainties in hours, where algorithms shape what they see, what they think, what they believe. They'll need tools to navigate this world. The ability to distinguish myth from history, the ability to recognize when a narrative serves particular interests, the ability to ask, is this true? How do we know? You can pass on these tools, not by telling them what to think, but by showing them how to think. William Dever spent 40 years searching for truth. He found it, even when it hurt, and he passed it on, in his books, in his lectures, in his teachings. You can do the same, on your scale, in your family, with your loved ones. It's not much, but it may be the most precious thing you can leave behind. Not reassuring certainties that confine, but tools for thinking freely. 3,000 years ago, somewhere in the Near East, a people created a story of liberation, of covenant, of promised land. This story was probably not true in the historical sense, but it changed the world. It gave birth to Judaism, to Christianity, to Islam. It shaped Western civilization. It inspired revolutions, liberation movements, struggles for human dignity. William Dever, the pastor turned archaeologist, spent his life searching for traces of this story. He found nothing, and in that nothing, he found something deeper. Proof that humanity, facing the void, creates meaning. That we, fragile and ephemeral creatures, are capable of building cathedrals of words that span millennia. Moses may never have existed as described, but the idea of Moses, the liberator, the lawgiver, the prophet, this idea exists. It lives in the minds of billions of people. It still inspires those who fight against oppression today. So here is the question I leave you with, the question I want you to sit with, the question you can meditate on in the days, weeks, years to come. If we know a narrative is a myth, a human construction, not historical truth, does that narrative lose its power to transform us? Or, on the contrary, does knowing it comes from us, from our creativity, from our need for meaning, make it even more precious? Truth doesn't descend from above. It's built down here by fragile, imperfect, mortal humans who refuse to disappear without leaving traces, who create stories to say, we were here, we lived, we searched. And this search, perhaps, is the only sacred thing.